Senate Republicans are mulling plan to squeeze House of Representatives on a continuing resolution to keep government open and fund war in Ukraine. But show of force by conservatives in House and Senate has them proceeding cautiously. Senate Republicans said last week they were ready to include money for Ukraine in a stopgap spending bill that must be passed by Sept 30 to avoid a government shutdown. But over the weekend, conservatives and moderates in the House agreed on a short-term measure that does not include money or disaster aid for Ukraine. This was a non-starter for many Republican senators. It's unclear whether the House bill has the GOP votes to pass it. Hill's whip count on the bill includes 10 no votes and some GOP lawmakers who lean no. If all Democrats vote against the legislation, Republicans could lose up to 4 votes. That raises possibility of a shutdown and further complicates the situation for Senate Republicans, who often view shutdown as a potential political albatross for their party. The Senate GOP is unsure of path forward, and Republican leaders are tempering their predictions that the Senate would temporarily add money for war in Ukraine because that would spark a conflict with conservatives in both chambers. That's a discussion that's going to happen soon, Senate Republican Rep. John Thune said of adding Ukrainian money to the stopgap measure. Sen. John Cornyn, a member of the Senate Republican leadership team, said, "I don't know what the plans are, but I certainly support additional funding for Ukraine, although I am not agnostic about at what point that will happen. I actually asked my staff to provide me with data on how much we have allocated and how much is actually being spent, so we can understand what the need is," he said. The conflict comes at a dramatic moment in Washington, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to visit Washington this week and press for continued aid to his war-torn country. Senate Republican leaders are also undecided about whether support a motion by Democrats to suspend the Senate rules get around objections raised by Sen. Ron Johnson, an outspoken conservative who last week derailed a minibus package funding military construction. Johnson told The Hill on Monday that there are growing reservations at the Senate GOP conference about adding more money for the war in Ukraine as a stopgap measure. This suggests that polls show strong opposition among Republican voters to spending more on Ukraine. There are a lot of people who have serious concerns about what's going on in Ukraine. And I will tell you that those who voted for us have really serious concerns about what's going on in Ukraine, Johnson said. A July CNNSSRS poll of 1,279 adults and 1,049 registered voters nationwide found that 71% of Republicans said Congress should not authorize new funding for Ukraine. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer must now decide whether pressure the House by addi.